We now come to the Statement Minister of State, Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With permission, Mr Speaker, I will make a statement updating the House on the government action to tackle child sexual abuse and exploitation and on progress on the recommendations of the independent inquiry. Child sexual abuse and exploitation are the most horrific and disturbing crimes and abuse of power against those who are the most vulnerable, leaving lifelong trauma and scars. Best estimates suggest that 500,000 children are sexually abused every year. Analysis by the police found that there were 115,000 recorded cases of child sexual abuse in 2023, 4,228 group-based offences identified by the CSE task force, of which 1,125 were family abuse and 717 were sexual exploitation cases. In a growing number of recorded cases, the perpetrators themselves are under 18. The House will be aware that in its first year of operation, up to March 24, the Grooming Gangs Task Force contributed to 550 arrests across the country. I can tell the House that in the last 9 months of 2024, the task force contributed to 597 arrests. In other words, it surpassed in that 9-month period what it achieved in its full first year of operation. Data for the first 3 months of this year is currently being collected from forces and will be available early next month. But all round, we are making progress at every level to increase the number of investigations, increase the number of arrests, and most importantly, the number of victims who are seeing their attackers brought to justice. Yet, despite the seriousness and severity of these crimes, there has been a shameful failure by institutions and those in power over many years to protect children from abuse or exploitation. So we are today setting out the progress update on action the government is taking to tackle child sexual abuse and exploitation, to get support and justice for victims, to ensure perpetrators are caught and put behind bars. Action on CSA since the election means we are introducing a new child sexual abuse police performance framework, including new standards on public protection, child abuse and exploitation. Legislating targeting online offending, including abuse and grooming enabled by AI. New powers for Border Force to detect digitally held child sex abuse at the UK border. New restrictions preventing registered sex offenders from changing their names to hide the threat they pose. Increased investment in law enforcement capability through the Police Undercover Online Network and Tackling Organised Exploitation programme. In the Home Secretary's statement to the House in January, she also set out what we are doing to crack down on grooming gangs, and today I can provide an update. Baroness Casey's 3-month national audit on group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse is ongoing. It is building a comprehensive national picture of what is known about child sexual exploitation, identifying local and national trends, assessing the quality of the data, looking at ethnicity issues faced, for example, by cases involving Pakistani heritage gangs, and reviewing police and wider agency understanding. We are developing a new best practice framework to support local authorities which want to undertake victim-centred local inquiries or related work. Drawing on the lessons from local independent inquiries like Telford, Rotherham and Greater Manchester, we will publish the details next month. Alongside this, we will set out the process through which local authorities can access the £5 million national fund to support locally led work on grooming gangs. Following feedback from local authorities, the fund will adopt a flexible approach to support both full independent local inquiries and more bespoke work, including local victims panels or locally led audits into the handling of historic cases. The Chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, Gavin Stevens, has, at the Home Secretary's request, urged the Chief Constables of all 43 forces in England and Wales to re-examine their investigations into group-based child sexual exploitation, which resulted in no further action decisions. And as of the 1st of April, the Child Sexual Abuse Review Panel can review child sexual abuse cases which took place after 2013. Victims and survivors can now ask the panel to independently review their case if they have not already exercised their victim's right to review. I can also announce that we intend to expand the Independent Child Trafficking Guardian scheme across all of England and Wales, providing direct support to many more child victims of sexual exploitation and grooming, which to date has only been available in selected areas. These measures will enable more victims and survivors to receive the truth, justice, improvements and accountability that they deserve, and put more vile perpetrators of this crime behind bars. Much of this crucial activity builds on the vital work of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse undertaken between 2015 and 2022. Let me, on behalf of this whole House, thank again Professor Alexis Jay for chairing that 7-year national inquiry with such expertise, diligence and compassion. ICSA revealed the terrible suffering caused by many child sex abuse victims and the shameful failure of institutions to put the protection of children before the protection of their own reputations. The inquiry drew on the testimony of over 7,000 victims and survivors and considered over 2 million pages of evidence. Its findings, culminating in the final report published in October 2022, were designed to better protect children from sexual abuse and address the shortcomings which left them exposed to harm. The publication of that final report 2.5 years ago should have been a landmark moment, but instead the victims and survivors were failed again. None of the inquiry's recommendations were implemented or properly taken forward by the previous government in the 20 months they had to do so. As part of today's progress update, the government is setting out the detailed update and timetable of the work that is underway on the ICSA recommendations as part of our action on child sexual abuse. I can announce to the House that to prioritise the protection of children and improve national oversight and consistency of child protection practice, this government will establish a new Child Protection Authority. Building on the National Child Safeguarding Review Panel, the Child Protection Authority will address one of ICSA's central recommendations by providing national leadership and learning on child protection and safeguarding. Work to expand the role of the panel will begin immediately, and we will consult on developing the new authority this year. We have also asked Ofsted, HMIC, FRS and the CQC to conduct a joint thematic review of child abuse in family settings starting this autumn. Mr Speaker, the ICSA report recommended the introduction of a new mandatory duty to report, something the Prime Minister, Home Secretary and I have all supported for more than a decade. In the Crime and Policing Bill, we will now be taking forward a new mandatory duty to report child sexual abuse for individuals in England, undertaking activity with children, and crucially, a new criminal offence of obstructing an individual from making a report under that duty. Mandatory reporting will create a culture of openness and honesty rather than cover-ups and secrecy. It will empower professionals and volunteers to take prompt, decisive action to report sexual abuse. It will demonstrate to children and young people that if they come forward, they will be heard, and anyone who seeks deliberately to prevent someone fulfilling their mandatory duty to report will face the full force of the law. Today's update also sets out how the government is supporting victims and survivors in accessing support and seeking justice. We are tasking the Criminal Justice Joint Inspectorates to carry out a targeted inspection on the experiences of victims of child sexual abuse in the criminal justice system. We are instructing the Information Commissioner's Office to produce a code of practice on the retention of personal data relating to child sexual abuse. In some cases where there have been serious institutional failings which contributed to the abuse, those institutions have provided financial redress schemes or compensation to victims and survivors who are affected. We continue to support those schemes as recognition by those institutions that they badly failed children in their care. On the ICSA proposal for a wider national redress scheme for all victims and survivors of child sexual abuse in institutional settings, the scale of that proposal demands that it is considered in the context of the spending review later this year, and we will make further updates at that stage. But one crucial area where we want to make immediate progress is on the provision of therapeutic services for victims and survivors of child sex abuse. We will therefore bring forward proposals in the coming weeks to improve access to those services, with further details to be set out following the up-and-coming spending review. Also, ahead of the spending review, I can announce that in this financial year, the Home Office will double the funding it provides for national services supporting adult survivors of child sexual abuse, providing more help to those adults who are living with the trauma of the horrific abuse they suffered as children. Finally, we want to speed up progress to make it easier for victims and survivors to get recompense directly from institutions that failed them. We are therefore removing the 3-year limitation period on victims and survivors, bringing personal injury claims in the civil courts and shifting the burden of proof from survivors to defendants, thereby protecting victims from having to relive their trauma to get compensation they are owed. Mr Speaker, today's update, building on the measures the Home Secretary announced in January, demonstrates this government's steadfast commitment to tackling child sex abuse. The measures we are implementing will protect more children, find more criminals and deliver support and justice to more victims and survivors. But this is not the end point. It is just the beginning. We will continue to drive forward reforms to protect more children from the abhorrent abuse and support more adult survivors of these traumatic crimes. And as we pursue our Safer Streets mission, we will use every available lever to drive progress on these issues across government and beyond. I want to finish with a word for the victims and survivors. No one should go through what you did. And while the failings of the past cannot be undone, we can, we must, and we will strain every sinew to prevent them being repeated. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement. In January, the Home Secretary said the government would conduct 5 local inquiries into the rape gangs which have terrorised so many innocent children. Over 3 months since the government announced these local inquiries, Tom Crowther KC, a barrister invited by the Home Office to help establish them, knows almost nothing about their progress, and neither do we. Why is the framework for local inquiries now being led by ministers rather than by independent voices such as Tom Crowther? Why is the £5 million set aside for inquiries no longer being allocated but instead delivered on an opt-in basis? And what does the government intend to do about local leaders who say there is no need for an independent inquiry, like in Bradford or in Wales? The girls we are talking about, Mr Speaker, are predominantly white. The men who preyed on them were predominantly Muslim, generally either from Pakistan or of Pakistani heritage. One of the victims from Dewsbury was told by her rapist, I quote, "We're here to fuck all the white girls and fuck the government." Will the Minister accept that, in many cases, these crimes were racially and religiously aggravated? How, without a national inquiry, can we understand what part these factors played? There is no question that the state has failed these children time and again. Take the case of Anna from Bradford. Vulnerable and in residential care, at the age of 14, she made repeated reports of rape and abuse to social workers who were responsible for her. But just the following year, aged 15, she married her abuser in a traditional Islamic wedding ceremony. Far from stepping in to stop it, her social worker was aghast. The authorities then arranged for her to be fostered by her abuser's parents. The ringleader of the Rochdale rape gang, Shabir Ahmed, was employed as a welfare rights officer by Oldham Council. And yet not one person, not one, has been convicted for covering up these institutionalised rapes. So why have ministers refused to establish a dedicated unit in the National Crime Agency to investigate councillors and officials accused of collusion and corruption? And I am sorry to say that that unit, Mr Speaker, must also investigate police officers. In one case, the father of an abuse victim in Rotherham was arrested by South Yorkshire Police when he attempted to rescue his daughter from her abusers. He was detained twice in one night, while on the very same evening, his daughter was repeatedly assaulted and abused by a gang of men. It is clear these criminals were unafraid of law enforcement. In Kirklees, Judge Marson said, "You were seen with your victim on at least 3 occasions by the police. None of that deterred you, and you continued to rape her." How, without a national inquiry, can we know how and why these monsters enjoyed effective immunity for so long, and how can we be sure it will not happen again? We on this side of the House have voted for a national inquiry and tabled amendments which would guarantee the publication of ethnicity data on a quarterly basis, terminate the parental rights of convicted sex offenders, and make membership of a grooming gang an aggravating factor during sentencing so that offenders get the longer, harsher sentences they deserve. Hear, hear. Will the Minister commit today to adopting these amendments to protect our children? Finally, I would like to read to the House one particular ordeal, just one example of what these children have suffered. I must warn colleagues, and especially those in the gallery, that this is extremely graphic, but we must not look away or sanitise this evil. Sentencing Mohammed Karar of Oxford to life in prison, Judge Peter Rook said, "You prepared your victim, a 13-year-old girl, for gang anal rape by using a pump to expand her anal passage. You subjected her to gang rape by 5 or 6 men. At one point, she had 4 men inside her. A red ball was placed in her mouth to keep her quiet. When she was 12, after raping her, she threatened you with your lock knife. Your reaction was to pick up a baseball bat with a silver metal handle, strike her on the head with it, and then insert it inside her vagina. This is not about me. It is not about the Minister or the Home Secretary or any of us in this chamber. It is about them, little girls up and down our country whose brutal and repeated rapes were permitted and hidden by those in the British state whose job was to protect them. They deserve justice. In 5 towns, these children and their families may get partial answers. But I have mentioned 5 towns in the last few minutes alone, and there are at least 45 more. In those places, they will get no answers at all. What does the Minister have to say to them? The British people deserve to know the truth. What darker truths does the suffering of these girls reveal about this country? And why won't the government find out?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady. I think it's a shame that she only referred to one sort of child abuse victim when the statement is clearly about all child abuse victims, of which there should be no hierarchy of who is. We are talking about also children raped by their fathers, raped in other circumstances, in children's homes and institutions for many, many years. And I think it is a shame that she didn't speak about any of their experiences, notwithstanding the very graphic and upsetting stories that she did tell. Obviously, I have worked for many years with those exact girls, and actually much of what the Honourable Lady already knows is because of inquiries that have already occurred, such as in Rotherham, such as in Rochdale, such as the 2-year inquiry as part of the ICSA panel, which she didn't refer to at all, which clearly looked into lots of areas and was a statutory inquiry. I wonder if she maybe wants to readdress herself with the 200 pages of that report. I understand the sense of anger and urgency over the issue from the Honourable Lady. None of this is her fault. She wasn't there at the time, but she works with the shadow ministers who sat in offices where I now sit, who did not lift a single finger when it came to the J inquiry on any of the recommendations it contained. Take the Shadow Home Secretary, who spent almost 2 years he spent as the Minister for Policing and Crime. He had 352 external meetings he held during his time in that role. 352 external meetings, including 23 separate meetings on policing of protest. Not once did he hold a discussion on grooming gangs or what the police were doing to investigate them. Not one meeting with the police, or with victims, or with local authorities, or with Alexis J, who had some choice words to say about some of the special advisors. I don't know if she knows who that was, in the department when she was trying to get her requirements across the line. What I will say is that the government has today published an action plan with all of the details, a plan for the future that is systematic, that is not about headlines, it is about the front line. It is about how these things are going to take time in lots and lots of areas of our country, that this doesn't happen overnight because somebody wins a political argument. It's going to take work, and I very much welcome her joining me, unlike for the years I was doing it, when the current Shadow Home Secretary never bothered.
Paul Waugh.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome today's action plan, and can I welcome in particular the creation of a new Child Protection Authority and the doubling of funding of those groups who are helping survivors and victims of child abuse up and down the country. The independent inquiry into grooming gangs in Rochdale, commissioned by Greater Manchester's Mayor Andy Burnham, was detailed and thorough and found serious failings by the statutory authorities. The priority now for my constituents is to make sure we're protecting women and girls in the here and now, as well as convicting perpetrators of past crimes. But few people know that there's no specific criminal offence of grooming. So can I thoroughly welcome the government decision to make grooming an aggravating offence in child sex abuse with longer sentences, something that was long overdue and something recommended by the Alexis J inquiry and something ignored by the previous government?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I have really enjoyed working with him on these issues and other people in Rochdale over the years. I very much hope that in a place like Rochdale, where they have already had independent inquiries, that they will be able to access some of the flexible fund to do follow-up work on where we are now, for example, that is victims-led, and I look forward to working with him in the future. And yes, I too am pleased that grooming will be an aggravating factor. It was a recommendation by Jay, in fact, even before the final ICSA recommendations.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Anna Sabine.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for advanced foresight of the statement and for the progress update to Parliament as promised. We welcome the progress being made by the Government on this issue that tragically continues to blight our society. As the Minister said, children across this country are still victims to these abhorrent crimes, and survivors await justice from previous abuse and exploitation. As members across this House would echo, the Liberal Democrats believe no child should ever be subjected to sexual abuse or exploitation, and it's clear that real action is needed to prevent such sickening acts from occurring. We've made it clear that steps must be taken at all levels of government to better protect children from sexual abuse and exploitation in the future, and to fully deliver justice for survivors and victims. In particular, we welcome the Government's announcement of a new Child Protection Authority and extra funding for national services that support adult survivors of sexual abuse. In fact, the establishment of the CPA was tabled as an amendment to the Children and Wellbeing in Schools Bill by my friend, the Honourable Member for Twickenham, and I know she's delighted to see it coming forward today. The Lib Dems are committed to working proactively and constructively with the Government and the whole House to support and protect vulnerable children at risk of exploitation and abuse, unlike, sadly, the Conservatives, who are still shamefully using the victims of grooming gangs scandal as a political football. The Liberal Democrats continue to commend the work of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse by Professor Alexis Jay, and we continue to call on the Government to urgently implement all 20 of her recommendations, which, as the Minister has mentioned, the Conservatives previously failed to act on when in government. While the Minister has spoken about some of the recommendations today, namely national leadership and learning on child protection and safeguarding and mandatory duty to report, can she commit today to implementing all the report's recommendations? And in doing that, can she confirm that the new Child Protection Authority will act as a national oversight mechanism to monitor the implementation of the J Review's recommendations across all relevant agencies and departments? And if not, will such a mechanism be brought forward? The Lib Dems support anything that will deliver justice for victims and help prevent these sickening crimes from happening in future.
I thank the Honourable Lady and to the Honourable Lady for Twickenham. I'm always keen to work cross-party on these issues and recognise that it had been pushed for previously. With regard to the CPA, there will be a consultation that is launched about exactly what that mechanism is going to look like. It will initially be part of the national panel and then be built on, but that consultation will take time rather than upending an entire system. That will be the mechanism that we'll go through, and I would very, very much welcome across the House help with that progress throughout. What I would say with regard to all the recommendations, there is a very detailed plan that has been published as part of this announcement that will be published today. I welcome people to look over that and of course, as I would do if I wasn't sitting in this position, push for more.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When Alexis Jay appeared before the Home Affairs Committee earlier this year, she was clear that at no point in 7 years and under 7 Conservative Home Secretaries did anyone say her inquiry was either too broad or not or too narrow, and nobody suggested to her that there needed to be further inquiries beyond what she produced. Can I welcome the Minister's announcement that the 3-year limitation period will be lifted, because we know that the average length of abuse for children is 4 years and the average length it takes someone to disclose their abuse is 26 years. So that's a very welcome announcement. Can I also ask about how the Child Protection Authority will work in practice? What will the funding situation be and what discussions has the Minister had with the Treasury? What is the timing to get it up and running as soon as possible? And also, can I ask for a guarantee that the voice of survivors will be central in the establishment of this authority?
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend, and I absolutely agree the voice of survivors has to be part of absolutely everything that we do going forward. The CPA will immediately be form part of the panel, and in this year's funding, extra funding will be going in to build on the analytical resources that it needs. The consultation that will be ongoing with experts, including the likes of Alexis J, who has been very involved in the conversations that we have been having, finally, because I think that unfortunately she was left out quite in the cold previously. We will look at what the best model is along with survivors and experts in the field.
Robbie Moore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say that I am completely infuriated by today's statement.
Yes.
Here we are on the very last sitting day before the Easter recess, and the government have all but admitted that no real progress whatsoever has been made on their promise to launch 5 local rape gang inquiries before Easter. But it gets worse than that, Madam Deputy Speaker. For more than 5 years, leaders at the very top of Bradford Council in my constituency have denied, refused and covered up the very single call that I, and indeed victims, survivors and their families, have been making for a full rape gang inquiry across Keighley and the wider Bradford district. Yet the Minister and this government refuses to face the facts. Bradford's leadership is simply not going to act by themselves. So I ask the Minister, why is this government letting the very councils that failed victims decide whether they want to be investigated or not? And when will this government step up, use their statutory powers and give the victims and the survivors in areas like Keighley and the wider Bradford district the full inquiry that they've wanted now for almost 2 decades?
Minister.
Hey, there is, first and foremost, I want to say to the honourable gentleman that I'm going to give him some absolute credit as being somebody who has 4 years spoken up about this issue. I pay absolute credit to him, and actually I'm surprised that we've not had closer conversations. As the first thing I would say is I would very much welcome, and I think it is actually being arranged from letters that he has sent to me, some time with the honourable gentleman to understand exactly what is going on in his local area, and I will be more than happy to sit down. And there is absolutely nothing that I am saying today that suggests that Bradford wouldn't be able to access funding from the Home Office, just as Oldham has, to undertake the work that might be needed in Bradford, and I would very much welcome a conversation with him about that.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's statement today and the progress that she is making, and I thank her for her very long and deep commitment to this issue and to seeing justice for victims. I want to ask her about the version of mandatory reporting that she is proposing to introduce. My understanding is that the mandatory reporting duty will apply in situations where a person has witnessed abuse or received a disclosure of abuse. This would seem to be quite a high bar. There are many examples of abuse taking place, for example, in schools and in children's homes, in which it is emerged later that suspicions of abuse were very widespread, but nobody witnessed the abuse and nobody received a disclosure of the abuse, and nobody reported their suspicions, allowing the abuse to continue. So is my honourable friend confident that the version of mandatory reporting that she's introducing is at the right threshold, and will she commit to review the impact of the new measure once it's taken effect and to strengthen it in future if needed?
Minister.
I thank the honourable lady, and again praise her for her commitment over the years to these issues. She is right, and the thresholds for mandatory reporting are a finely balanced tool. What we had to land on is the criminal justice outcomes for the most egregious cases, where, as other members have mentioned, it seemed as if social workers were directly covering up or in certain cases, and then professional sanctions in cases where people just fail to report. I think that the issue she's talking about signs and things, I very much hope will be dealt with in the training and rollout of this, but absolutely, when any new law comes into place and we roll out training, we will absolutely review it as we go along.
Sir Julian Smith.
I welcome the mandatory reporting progress. I think it's also worth acknowledging the bill that I led through the House that is now paid out £100 million in Northern Ireland to survivors of institutional sexual abuse, and also the fact that during the progress of that bill and the discussions I had there, the mealy-mouthed apologies from institutions was abhorrent. So could I urge the Right Honourable Lady to push very hard on church institutions and other institutions to make sure they pay and they apologise?
Absolutely, and actually some of the changes that the Honourable Gentleman will read about in the subsequent documents that will be published is around exactly the issue of apology and the limitations of mealy-mouthed apologies, and actually what that means to the victims is so awful. So absolutely I will commit to pushing the institutions to do exactly what they need to do to make honest apologies. And I have to say, in recent weeks and months, it's not always had the best examples of that on display.
Harpreet Uppal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Victims of child sexual abuse were badly let down by institutions, and we must recognise that this continues and it's all our responsibility to act. So can I warmly welcome the commitment to introduce mandatory reporting, and it has taken too long to get to this place. So can she say a little bit more about the training that will be available to professionals and volunteers so they can support the potential signs and indicators? And is she able to say more about how local victims panels will be adequately resourced? Thank you.
So to answer the first question, we will publish exactly how local panels, at the beginning of next month, we will publish how local panels can be set up and work that can happen in local authority areas. And alongside the mandatory duty legislation, there will absolutely be guidance that is written and training that will be being provided to roll that out, recognising that when we're talking about people who work with children, often we think of teachers or social workers. We are talking about sports coaches as well. We are talking about people in the clergy. We are talking about lots of different people. So the guidance is going to have to be quite widely drawn and quite specific.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the Minister's statement, and I also share her disappointment that the opposition benches, the Conservative benches in particular, have sought to pick out one particular community, and they vilify day after day Muslims in this chamber. As somebody who's got Muslim family, who has brown skin, can I just say that we feel increasingly uncomfortable in our own country, given the attacks we hear day after day from the Conservatives on all Muslims. It's an absolute disgrace. And the fact that they didn't introduce a child protection authority when they were able to in government, Professor Jay told me they claimed they didn't have legislative time. We all know that they did, so I welcome that. Could I just press the Minister to give me her personal assurance that she will work with her colleagues in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology to ensure that we strengthen our online safety regulation and don't water it down in any way, because Professor Jay is very clear that online sexual exploitation and abuse is huge and growing.
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady, and actually, if even in the 2.5 years since Alexis Jay published her review, the reality is that we know even more about the harms that are occurring online. Now, whilst that we finally, only in the last month, have seen the enaction of the Online Safety Act, the government has made clear that where there is opportunities to go further, if they are needed, on various things, like the recommendations that Alexis Jay has made, that we will be looking at that. Absolutely.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like many have said, in this debate today, any time we look at child sexual abuse in this place and beyond, we must always put the victims first. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to welcome the statement from the Safeguarding Minister and emphasis that she's placed on supporting police investigations across the country to get justice for victims and ensure those responsible are put behind bars. I know that the Grooming Gangs Task Force contributed to 550 arrests, and we've heard today 597 in the last months of 2024. Can the Safeguarding Minister give us further details on how the new measures today will ensure that we can truly work collaboratively across government, police forces, public sector, local authorities to protect all children from sexual abuse and ensure that as a government we do not allow the shameful failure of institutions to protect themselves before they protect our children?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she is absolutely right that working in partnership, and really in partnership, not just saying it, is important at both the highest level, so here in these buildings and in Whitehall. And so we have set up an interministerial group on which I sit on with my honourable friend from the Department for Education to make sure that we are working together. And actually, in the process of producing the documents that we will produce today, the level of government minister and Secretary of State engagement through the Cabinet Office has been, I have to say, it's been a pleasure to do that work. But we have to make sure that that is happening at a local level, and that is why the Children's Wellbeing Bill and the things that it outlines specifically around the need for multi-agency working to be improved is going to be so vital if we're, and in the reforming of social work is so vital that is it within that bill to actually finally get a grip on this.
Sir Jeremy Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know the Minister will join me in paying tribute to child sexual abuse specialist prosecutors who deploy their considerable expertise to put together cases based on what can be complex and, as we've heard, very distressing evidence. But when it comes to the allocation of resources, will she make sure that a fair share of those resources reaches those prosecutors? Because just as the public will expect child sexual abuse to be detected, as she will recognise, they also expect it to be effectively prosecuted.
The Honourable Gentleman makes a really, really good point that an actual forgotten part of the system is the legal process. And having worked with Nazir Afzal, for example, who was the prosecutor on the Rochdale cases for many years, I think that those people can be really forgotten. And so we have asked the Joint Inspectorate to look specifically into the justice system and what needs to be done in those. But undoubtedly there are cases currently waiting in a long backlog because there aren't the prosecutors and there aren't the defence or court space. It has to be part of a much bigger part of work, but I will absolutely take away what he has said.
Katrina Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her statement, and I pay tribute to the considerable expertise she has in this field. The victim survivors of childhood sexual abuse have spent far too long waiting for justice. But as my right honourable friend said earlier, childhood sexual abuse knows no hierarchy. It also knows no borders. We have different legislative systems within this country, and we cannot allow for action to only be taken in one of those fields, those areas, and victims being potentially left. Can I ask what discussion she would have with the Scottish Government so we could take this forward on a joint basis?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and we have had discussions with our Scottish counterparts, really specifically on some of the legislation that we are currently passing. Certainly this legislation around child sexual abuse online and AI and some of the dangers that Alexis Jay so rightly pointed out in the final recommendations of her report. So we have those conversations. Obviously, decisions, the issues of child protection are devolved to Scotland, but this is not something that we especially because children are trafficked across that border, this is not something that we can do in isolation, and I'm always very happy to work with counterparts in the Scottish Government to drive progress and frankly learn from them sometimes.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the anger and frustration expressed by my honourable friend, the member for Keighley and Ilkley, about the lack of progress on inquiring into the rape gangs, and I was incredibly disappointed by the failure to answer a single question put to the Minister by my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, including the refusal to acknowledge that these crimes were racially and religiously aggravated. So I want to repeat just one of those questions. In many of the rape gang cases, counsellors, council workers and police officers were complicit and often corrupt. So why is the government refusing to set up a specialist unit in the National Crime Agency to investigate those who should have protected those innocent girls and instead participated in and facilitated their abuse?
To answer the honourable gentleman's question, is that if there is criminal cases that can be taken against any of these people, I am absolutely certain that the task force that is working across to improve the arrests, as we have talked about, how we have seen an increase in arrests, but I am more than happy to go and speak to the task force and see where there can be criminal cases taken against those people. I am more than happy to see those people locked up for as long as they deserve. However, what I would say is that without the mandatory reporting duty on the statute books, we were left for some decades without that to be able to take to task criminally people who covered this up. We will rectify that.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for their statement. I don't think there's anyone more credible to lead on this issue. I think it's absolutely disgusting that the last government had 89 weeks to implement the J inquiry, but implemented absolutely zero of the recommendations, but yet come here today to grandstand on that very issue.
Absolutely.
A decade ago, the Director of Public Prosecutions recommended mandatory reporting. He happens to be our Prime Minister now, of course. So it's taken 10 years for this to happen. What has been lost in that time and what can be gained in the coming years?
I thank the honourable gentleman. Unfortunately, what I think has been lost in that time was the ability to hold to account, which, you know, we don't actually. And actually, even in a statutory inquiry, if information was found out about, for example, about counsellors, that wouldn't lead to their arrest. That's not what a statutory inquiry does. Nobody is in prison from any of the statutory inquiries that we've had. And so we want to focus on really criminalising those and really focus our attention on that. And I'm afraid to say, without mandatory reporting, what we have seen is lots of people, frankly, get away with cover-ups in the intervening years. What I hope to see for the future, actually, isn't that I want to see locked up loads of people who are bad. What I hope to see is that it creates a culture in child protection services that is one of openness and transparency, that is the thing that should be celebrated, not the reputation of the organisation.
Tessa Munns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I say my blood is boiling listening to this stuff coming from the Conservative benches. If they had read the ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, they would recognise that there are hundreds of thousands of people alive today, people just like me, white girls who suffered at the hands of white men, and they've just got clean away with it because nothing was done for so long. I welcome the statement that was made today. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I just say, I think I'm very glad to hear that this is the start of a plan and not a finish. Of course, not rocket science. I recognise the value of mandatory reporting, and I recognise indeed the importance of criminalising those who obstruct an individual from reporting. I wondered if we could also step that down a little bit and say that those who coerce or gently discourage, particularly those from reporting, would also be somehow captured in that criminalisation. And may I also ask that I know the Minister knows that I have been working on an amendment to Clause 45 of the bill, which will cover religious institutions and faith-based organisations, and that there should be no longer a convention of absolute confidentiality for those who take confession in that religious setting. There's a conflict and a tension, and we need to make sure that that in some way is made explicit and that no one is excluded from mandatory reporting. Thank you.
I thank the honourable lady, and what I would say with regard to coercion and pushing it, actually, if coercion can be evidenced, which we have many laws in our country now, actually, something that the previous government did do, was make laws on coercion. So the issue of coercion, actually, if that could be evidenced, that would, if you coerce somebody into not saying, that would be seen as being something that would be criminal. and gently trying to cover up. Any of this that can be evidenced would be considered a cover-up. Obviously, this will all be tested when it actually comes to pass. And as for clause 45, which, funnily enough, the committee, where I think we may get up to clause 45 today, that I am also meant to be on, so we'll get back to immediately afterwards. I'm more than happy to have conversations. Just to say that the church and faith leaders and faith groups are absolutely within the purview of this, and making sure that we don't make workarounds for certain things is absolutely in everybody's best interest.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, gave very graphic and disturbing examples of some horrific abuse suffered by just a couple of the young ladies affected by these grooming gangs, and she asked some important questions about grooming gangs. And I was disappointed to see that the Minister, instead of answering her questions, talked about lists of numbers of meetings that her predecessors have had, and talked about the fact that many girls are abused by people who are not in grooming gangs. Of course that's true, but both are important.
Yes,
One of the answers that I did hear her give to another honourable member was, and I quote, "As I would do if I wasn't sitting in this position, push for more." So I ask her, why are the inquiries only limited to 5 areas? What about those in the other areas? Does she not recognise that giving people a choice of whether their area is investigated or not is an incentive for those who wish to cover up not to bid, or not to bid well for those inquiries? And above all, who or what is preventing her from delivering the more she would push for if she was sat here?
Absolutely nobody is stopping me from pushing for more, which I'm sure that all of my ministerial colleagues would tell you, having been in meetings with me. But I think it is the point of view of Parliament. That is what Parliament is here to do. It is here to strength test the things that we do. And absolutely, I welcome that. And to the previous honourable lady's point, what I absolutely do want to say is this is just the beginning, not the end, as I said in my statement. With regard to the areas, as I've said, the details of how local areas can fit into that will be published by the end of the month. And actually, I mentioned grooming gang victims throughout many times in my statement. I also mentioned other victims of the many other inquiries, in fact, that have gone on. I only wish that people were quite so well versed in some of the other areas. My only criticism of the lady on the shadow front bench is that she only mentioned one. I mentioned many.
Carla Lockhart.
Deputy Speaker, I know the Minister is passionate about this issue and I commend her for her efforts. Would she not agree with me that the sentencing for these most abhorrent crimes needs to truly reflect the seriousness of the offence? I don't think anyone can sit in this House today and not be broken or feel sick to the pit of their stomach when we hear the accounts from the front benches. Anyone who takes the innocence of a child away must serve the toughest of sentence. After all, these children have been subjected to a lifetime of trauma as a result of these horrific acts.
Minister.
The honourable lady makes a very good point, because actually, for the victims I've worked with over the years, it's a life sentence. It's not something that goes away, which is one of the reasons that I feel really strongly about trying to improve the levels of therapeutic support for both children and adults, and why that's something that has been a real priority for me. She's absolutely right on the sentencing. The government is undertaking a sentencing review into the broader sense, but also that is the reason that we are putting grooming as an aggravating factor into sentencing, into the law currently, where I'm meant to be in 2 places at once. In fact, I think that amendment is that clause is probably being discussed on committee literally right now.
Caroline Burden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to say that I also welcome the government statement and the progress they're making on implementing recommendations from the J Review, and I am also deeply disappointed that the Conservatives have chosen to respond to the statement in this way and refuse to acknowledge any progress that the government is making after years of inaction on their part. So, as the Minister knows, before being elected to this House, I was the Chief Executive of Devon Rape Crisis and Sexual Abuse Services, an organisation that supports victims of child sexual abuse. I know how vital these support services are to rebuilding the lives of those who have been shattered by abuse, helping them become adults who can live a more settled and fulfilling life.
That organisation is dealing with a cut in funding of around a third and has already had to close its helpline. And I know many other similar organisations across the country are facing a similar cliff edge due to funding cuts, as well as pressures from things like inflation and national insurance increases. So I do warmly welcome the Minister's announcement of a doubling in funding for adult survivors of child sexual abuse. I'd just like to ask her what steps the Government is taking to ensure that children who have been victims of child sexual exploitation and grooming can receive timely access to appropriate victim support and trauma-informed services. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Lady. Specifically to speak about victims of grooming, as I said in my statement, we are spreading, we will set out the commissioning for the new service for across England and Wales for the independent child trafficking guardians, and actually children who access through the national referral mechanism as trafficking victims, which lots of children who are groomed, British children who are groomed do, access through that system, will be able to access the support through that system. But as is laid out in the documents that we have today, actually improvements are needed in children's sexual violence therapeutic support. Anyone who has worked on the front line would absolutely know that, and anyone who's tried to make a referral through the generic services would also know that. And so what I wish, it would be disingenuous of me to stand here before the comprehensive spending review and say, and also I'm not sure that the Chancellor would thank me, but absolutely one of the major recommendations of ICSA was around children's therapeutic support, and that is very much at the front of my mind while we go through the comprehensive spending review.
Final question on this statement, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for her answers and her commitment to bring justice to the victims. No one denies that the Honourable Lady has a big heart and a real determined to get the answers that we all wish to see. With sexual offences at an all-time high in Northern Ireland, I know the Honourable Lady is an interest in Northern Ireland, with some 4,232 such incidents recorded between April 2022 and March 2023, an increase of some 4.7% on the previous year. It's clear that the protection of children, our most vulnerable, needs to be a priority. So will the Minister outline what discussions the Minister will have with the Northern Ireland Assembly to ensure that Northern Ireland will have support to address these horrifying figures, understanding that for every incident reported as against everyone that is not reported, we maybe are not just getting at the figure which is there. Yeah.
I agree with the Honourable Gentleman that even if we have arguments about data in this House and what data hasn't been collected, what progress we have, actually the reality is the vast majority of data we'll never know because we don't ever see it, and that is something that we should all strive to overcome. I visited Northern Ireland recently and specifically went to the PSNI and worked specifically with the team who were dealing with online child sex abuse and looked at the processes that they were doing to undertake undercover action on that particular issue. I continue, not just because part of my heart is in Northern Ireland through my father, but also I think that working with the PSNI, and I met with those in the executive, there is a real determination in Northern Ireland, and I have to say maybe because it's largely led by women, that, well done Northern Ireland, there's real appetite, and I will happily work with them as much as we possibly can.
That concludes the statement, and I'll give the front benches a few moments to change over.